Good morning, friends. Welcome to today's Daily Dharma. In this little series I'm doing, exploring what's called the three characteristics, which is understanding kind of how this world is put together, how it bees, how it functions. Um, and yesterday, so exploring these in general, but also specifically how the body manifests these, these truths, these characteristics, and they are change, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. Yesterday we talked about change and practice noticing change in the body. Today, gonna talk about unsatisfactoriness. That's one word. The Pali word is dukkha, often gets translated into suffering, but helpful to have some other words that round out this, what this is pointing to, such as unsatisfactory, unstable, vulnerable. Yeah, all these kind of point to this truth. And just to say, we say that the three characteristics, it's not like there's three different truths. There's just, the way it is the way it is. There's not three the way it is. There's one. But we can kind of understand it or perceive it in these three different ways. And one example I like to use is light coming through a prism. Like those things you hang in your window, right? Light comes through, and then there's a rainbow, on the ceiling or on the wall. Well, it's just one light, right? So let's say there's 5 different colors on the wall. It's not 5 different lights that came through, right? There's just one, but it's like it's expressed in those 5 different ways. Yeah, there are those 5 different facets of it. So it's the same thing. There's just one the way it is, but we can see it or experience it in these different ways. And so when we talk about the three characteristics, whenever we talk about one, we're talking about the other two as well. We can't really fully separate them. And so as we start to explore this second one, dukkha, Pali, it's all about kind of the implications, you might say, of change. And so I just want to step back a little bit and talk about something which will help, I think, here fill out the picture and help us also understand dukkha. Because just thinking of it as suffering is way too narrow a way or a description to actually understand kind of the breadth of what we're pointing to here. So there's something called dependent co-arising, which is a big fancy term, which means everything depends on everything else. And specifically, so dependent co-arising, everything arises dependent upon the arising of other things, co-arising, right? So it's a really windy day. That's got my attention. Let's go with the wind. The wind's blowing. It's cold day here. And someone takes their coat and goes like this. Ooh, right? So that's an arising, that movement. Anything that happens in this world is like considered an arising, a thought, an action, a word, really anything that happens. So this happened, but that arose dependent on that cold wind blowing. If that cold wind had not blown in that moment, the person would not have done that, right? So they're together. They affect one another. And then the person doing that may have caused another arising. Like maybe the person that was with them, something arose in their mind, like, oh, this person's cold. Maybe some, kindness or tenderness arose in their heart, like, oh, put their arm around them, or would you like my jacket, or right? Then it caused that to arise. And Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, so everything is happening that way. Everything is bouncing off one another, right? There's no separate existing thing that's happening that isn't tied into everything else in this way, right? And that's where we're going to get more into the not self part, but that's for another time. And so it's infinitely complex, right? These arisings. Because they're connected to everything that ever was, really. Every moment that's ever occurred since the Big Bang, somehow, some way, is part of this moment arising. And this moment arising is simultaneously part of, in some way, of every other moment that's arising or will arise after that. So it's completely, beyond our imagination complex. Now, why is this important in understanding dukkha? Because it's so complex, we can't control it. And things are just going to happen whether we want them to or not. They may happen and we like it. That's great. It may happen, we might not like it. We can't control it. We can control some things for sure, but ultimately we can't just demand that things be a certain way. We just, because we're part of the system, we're not outside of it. We are also dependent co-arising. Again, that's more for another exploration. And so, because we can't control it, we are vulnerable. Here's the vulnerability part to things happening. This world just continues to unfold in a dependent co-arising way. We're in that mix and we're just susceptible. We just are. Just being in this realm means we're vulnerable. Because everything is vulnerable. Everything is vulnerable to being impacted by other conditions. And the Buddha gave a teaching that speaks to this. It's called the worldly winds. Like sometimes they blow this way, sometimes they blow that way. And the main part of this is, and we can't control it. So like things like gain and loss. We can't ultimately control them, right? Maybe you try to save some money, maybe you can save a little bit of money, and all of a sudden, boom, the transmission goes on your car. It's like, there goes perhaps the money that you saved. It's like, we can't control that. There was a little bit of gain, and now there's loss. These winds blow. Pleasure and pain, then like in relation to other people, like praise and blame. We're just being ourselves. We'll just make a decision and do something. I don't know. I got extra large eggs instead of large eggs at the supermarket. It's like, well, someone might blame me for doing that. How could you do that? It's too expensive. Someone else might praise me for doing the same thing. Oh, I'm so glad you got the extra large. I wanted to, make this recipe, whatever, right? We can't control these winds. And then the last set of 4 is fame and disrepute. So kind of how we're held. Here we are, buffeted. I think that even might be the word in that sutta. We're buffeted by these winds. We're buffeted by living in this realm of constant change, right? So because things are dependently co-arising and affecting other things all the time, there's just changes happening, right? So here's this very direct link between dukkha and change. And of course, there's a direct link between all 3 of them. Okay, great. So there's the kind of explanation. But what we're looking at specifically with this little series is how do we come to know these characteristics right in our own bodies? And, just like the body is just the supreme vehicle for knowing change, right? The body is the supreme vehicle for knowing vulnerability. I mean, look, right, the global pandemic. These bodies are susceptible to viruses. When the conditions changed and this virus made the change from an animal to a human, and we're susceptible. That is dukkha. That even so, here's the important part. It's not just that it happened is dukkha, that it even could happen is dukkha. See, it's describing the realm we live in. It's often used, oh, I broke my arm. That was such dukkha. And it's like, well, yes, that's one narrowish way of understanding dukkha, and it's not wrong. That's correct, but it's much broader and deeper. Just the fact that there's a potential to have a pandemic is dukkha, because it's describing how that could possibly happen, which is dependent co-arising. And so this is where we find ourselves. And this pandemic and our body's susceptibility to this, I can't think of another thing in our life that would speak this more clearly, speak this meaning dukkha, than this pandemic and how susceptible our bodies are to this tiny little, I don't know, I'm not a scientist, clump of proteins or whatever that we call virus. Or, even I'm a little stuffy today, I've been sneezing the last few days. It's like, oh, there might be some kind of different kind of virus. I mean, what we would call a head cold or something, not a big flu. Not something I necessarily would want. I'm starting to teach a retreat tonight. Might make my energy lower, but again, susceptible, vulnerable, change, right? So I talked about unstable in terms of dukkha. There was health, but the stability of that health isn't guaranteed. Now, boom, maybe some illness, maybe there's a cold happening, and just on and on and on. So our bodies are very, very good vehicles with which to understand all three characteristics, and in this case today, the instability, the vulnerability aspect of dukkha. So let's go ahead and do a little formal practice. We just have a few minutes, but it won't take long to understand dukkha as we start to pay attention to the body. Okay, settling in to the posture you're going to take. And even as you just start to settle in and bring your attention to the body, how is it right now? And that, I say this, that what we're experiencing right in this moment isn't completely up to us, that it's possible that we might be experiencing some pain or some unpleasantness. Just the possibility of that is dukkha. Something may not be digesting right. We bent over in a funny way and there's some muscle pain. We slept on our neck wrong. Or here's another important aspect, or the body feels fine, connecting with the sensations, neutral, maybe even slightly pleasant, no problem, nothing really unpleasant that you can notice. The fact that this is going to change and by definition can't last, that is also dukkha. So even the pleasantness or the neutrality that you may be feeling in your body right now is also dukkha, subject to change. One of the most famous phrases I think that the Buddha ever spoke is Sabbe Sankhara Anicca. All conditioned things, talking about that conditionality, all conditioned things are subject to change. They are subject to being born, living, and passing away. That being subject to the part of it, being subjected to the forces of this realm, this is dukkha. The ways we pollute our water and air and soil and food impacts our bodies, detrimentally impacts our bodies. This is dukkha. Not just because it's detrimental, but because we are so connected with everything. That's really the dukkha part, or the most pervasive dukkha part. Of course, that they're aging. For those of you listening that are more on the older side, really getting to feel the aches and pains that don't go away. The truth of this aging body, this is dukkha. We sit with this experience, this somatic experience of body. And in that experience, right in that connection, nothing needs to particularly happen in order for what we're feeling to be broadcasting the truth of dukkha. Can we open to this? Can we just be on board with this is how it is? It's not terrible in every moment. It'd be quite challenging and also be lovely in all of it. Dukkha. The body exquisitely manifesting this reality. One place, another good way to notice it, you're meditating, start to get sleepy. Didn't choose that or necessarily want that. The conditions were supportive of sleepiness to arise, and there we are. We're subject to that. Again, just the fact that sleepiness could happen, not even that it happened, but even that it could happen, is dukkha. Mm. Just to say quickly, understanding the characteristics, and especially when we're talking about dukkha, it's not meant to be a bummer. It's not meant to be like, oh, life is just terrible and, get over it. It's not like that. It's really just becoming congruent with how things are. And then based on doing that, we don't struggle or struggle less even. It's like there's an understanding that this is how it is, and something stops struggling, something stops fighting with how it is. And it's the absence of that struggle, the absence of that reactivity that gets experienced as peace, as contentment. And so it can be helpful just to, just consciously like frame things that happen just through the day, through these characteristics, and in terms of today, through dukkha. So here's just a very kind of goofy example, but I'm using it because we can do it with anything. I love snow, and it was supposed to snow here last night, and it didn't. Why? Because conditions were supportive for it not to, and I'm not in control of those conditions. So I wake up this morning and it's like, there's no snow on the ground. Now, this isn't huge, but again, vulnerable to things changing, vulnerable to things being different than how we would want them to be. And so we can just, oh, right, here's an example of dukkha, right? Instead of something being wrong, here's kind of the shift that we can use just in our everyday life example. Shifting from something being wrong and shouldn't have happened to understanding as, oh, look, here's an example of dukkha. Here's an example of that vulnerability, of that instability. Now, I have to say, in saying this, it doesn't mean that we might not take action on something that needs to be rectified or whatever. So not to say that it's just dukkha, and no, some things really need to be addressed, right? Systemic racism needs to be addressed, right? Income inequality needs to be addressed. Climate change needs to be addressed. But it's how we can understand it that we can start to understand things through the lens of these three characteristics. And so there's just, ample opportunity to practice during the day. Okay, friends, that's it for now. We'll continue with this next week. I don't have the schedule in front of me, but I'll be here one of the days, and wish you well till then. Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.